It is time to finish the player season reviews for Pacers players this season. 3 more players to go today, and it's perhaps the most fun 3 players to talk about this season. Malcolm Brogdon, Tyrese Haliburton, Caris LeVert will recap all of their seasons with the Pacers today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News. And today, it is the last day of May, and it's the last day of the player season recaps. The final start later this week, and free agency stuff will really heat up with every team out but two. So it's the last day to really look back at the 2021-22 season. We're going to review the season of 3 very key players for the Pacers this past season. Tyrese Haliburton, Malcolm Brogdon, and Caris LeVert all had huge bearings on the Pacers season, their expectations, and what happened ultimately in the season. I'm really looking forward to talking about these guys and wrapping up the player season review series. We can look ahead to the offseason because I know a lot of more people are interested in that stuff at this time of year, but I really love looking back at these player seasons. So we'll go in the order of Haliburton, LeVert, Brogdon today. And just so you all are reminded, Locked On Pacers is free and available on all platforms. Thanks for making me your first listen every single day. Let's dive right in and talk about Tyrese Haliburton's wonderful first season with the Indiana Pacers. It's hard to find somebody higher on Tyrese Haliburton than me. This guy makes it happen on offense. It's a rare combination of being able to see the entire floor and create for his teammates, and also just elite, ridiculous pull-up shooting numbers. That's such a hard combination to find, and Haliburton's got both, right? Over 40% from 3, nearly 10 assists per game with the Pacers. Those stats combined are so hard to find, and yet Tyrese Haliburton did it, and he did it easily. He did it with the Kings. He's done it with the Pacers. It's clearly a skill set he's going to have going forward. Takes a lot of threes, makes hard passes, actually throws guys open. A very, very elite skill set, and one that getting better will make him hard to guard. You got to chase him out to the three-point line, but that allows him to see more alleys. It allows cutters to be more open. It makes him elevate the Pacers offense to levels that are just so hard to match. And I think that is why I'm so high on him. In the modern NBA, high-level decision-making, high-level offense from guys who have the ball all the time is so valuable. And Tyrese Haliburton certainly is going to have the ball a lot for the Pacers going forward. And that is why I think that this trade, the Pacers made trading Sabonis for him. Obviously, it hurts to trade away a 2-time All-Star, but I definitely think it will be something that benefits them long-term as the season continues. And in terms of three-point percentage from Haliburton on pull-up threes with the Pacers, 41%. Those are supposed to be the harder ones. The catch-and-shoot ones are supposed to be the easy ones. He shot over 40% on the toughies, and that is, again, what made his season so special. So when I think of the skills that were good about his season, those passing and the pull-ups were the thing that really stood out to me. He ended up in only 26 games with the Pacers with 249 assists. That is insane. Basically 250 assists in 26 games. You look back on the Pacers season at their assist totals by player, he was first on the Pacers in total assists this past season. He played 26 games, and he led the team in assists. He passed Sabonis, he passed Brogdon, he passed LeVert, guys who played way more games than him, like Justin Holiday, obviously not a passer. He eclipsed them easily, right? He is an elite passer, and that court vision is so helpful in terms of reading the game and guiding a team's offense. Now, what was bad about Haliburton's season? This is something he's definitely going to have to work on, and I think this will be a huge talking point for the Pacers' growth going forward. His defense. His defense is not very strong, right? It's not my favorite advanced stat, but it's in the top 2 or 3. BPM from Basketball Reference, box plus minus, suggests that Tyrese Haliburton is a negative defender, and I very much agree with that, right? He reads the game well, so he's like in the right spots a lot, but he's definitely a little reachy. He's not great at staying in front of guys. His speed is not always used perfectly on defense. It's weird. Like, he is a quick player. He reads the game very well. He puts effort in on defense, and yet the package isn't there. It's not all connected. He does get blown by a lot. He does sometimes fall asleep away from the play. His transition instincts are to cut off the ball and not necessarily stay in his lane. That is where I think he needs to grow the most. I think he knows that. I think that's a very obvious thing about his skill set. And usually guys who can read the game at a high level on one end eventually get good on the other end. And I think Tyrese Haliburton will get better on the defensive end. But they were a much better defensive team with him off the floor than on the floor during his time with the Pacers, and I think that is a key indicator that he does need to get better on that end of the floor. And that is what's holding him back from being like an all-star level player right now. Like his offensive stats are matched by I didn't actually do the numbers before the show, but very few guys in the league match his averages of 17.5 and 9.6 assists. Well, those are great numbers, especially when you include the shooting. It might be nobody in the league, but his defense prevents him from being a super high impact player and just a high impact player. And yet I'm still so high on him because of that ability to read the game. And one stat that tells it all about Tyrese Haliburton's season with the Pacers, his brief season after being a traded guy, is the on-off numbers on offense. Offensive rating for the Pacers with Tyrese Haliburton off the floor this past season. 3,000 minutes. This is a ton. 111.49. It's not very good. That's one of the lower numbers in the league. But with Tyrese Haliburton on the floor for 938 minutes, way higher. 118 to be specific, 118.08. Basically plus 7 points per 100 possessions that Tyrese Haliburton juiced the Pacers on offense. That's a ton of points. That's huge in terms of net rating value on that end of the floor. He himself obviously can score, and there are some aggression things where he needs to hunt a shot more often. But that's obvious. He gets his 17.5 on efficient scoring, right? That's another big boost of his offensive game. 69.2% true shooting. 62.9, excuse me, I just said that backwards, with the Pacers, right? When he shoots, it goes in very often. He's good at creating his own opportunities and setting up others. But he also boosts other players because he can space and pass. Guys shoot better with him. And on the floor, I'm having trouble talking. Excuse me. For when he's in, the Pacers' 2-point percentage was 55.46 when he was out. Their 2-point percentage was 53.66 when he was in. Their 3-point percentage was 36.57 when he was out. Their 3-point percentage was 33.67. Obviously, he himself boosts both percentages because he makes shots, but he also boosts other guys' percentages by making their shots easier, getting them the ball in their shooting pocket at the right time after manipulating the defense. That has a ton of value. That will always have value, and he's only going to get better. It's still so hard to remember this. Tyrese Haliburton was drafted in November of 2020. He's been in the NBA for 16 months, 17 months. He's going to get much, much better. Chris Duarte will hit 17 months before next season starts, basically. Chris Duarte will hit 17 months and about the start of next season. Tyrese Haliburton's played 2 full seasons in that time. And I think that is where you're going to see he's going to grow quite a bit heading into next season, especially with that offensive impact as he continues to read the game. And as you've seen, if you follow the Pacers on any social media, he's been in Indy a lot this summer, working in their practice facilities. We've seen Dwayne Washington there, Terry Taylor, Isaiah Jackson, Duarte. A couple other guys have been there. Gabe York, I think, has been in some photos. And Haliburton is there quite often. And if I missed anybody, I apologize to them. But those are just the names that came into my mind. Haliburton's there all the time. So I think he's going to grow quite a bit with these teams. The area for growth for Tyrese Haliburton, already said it, defense. Got to get better on that end of the floor. Even just being a league average level defender. And according to the impact numbers, he sniffed it with the Kings. He was getting close this season with the Kings. But with the Pacers, it fell back a little bit. Their scheme hurt a lot of guys in terms of defensive impact this season. But I think that if he could just be a league average level defender, he might be all-star level player. I mean, I think that might be a little rosy of an outlook, but I don't think that's that crazy. His numbers, his impact are that strong. But his defense is very poor right now. Some sites that I follow for certain stats or that evaluate certain skills in a statistical measure suggest he's like a bottom 20% defender in the NBA. And I would buy that. I think he's close to that. I think he can definitely get much better very quickly, though. And I think a full season training with the Pacers will certainly help him get the schemes down quicker. He'll know his teammates better. There'll be more stability after the COVID seasons are over. You can make up every reasoning or excuse that you want, but I do think as he just naturally gets better, he's 21 years old. He will be closer to an average level defender this next season, and that will be huge. But if he gets better on the end of the floor, if he can be a positive on defense, he's going to be a damn good player. So what's his future with the team? That's how we always wrap up these player season recap segments. I don't think there's any secret to what Tyrese Haliburton's future with the team is. He's the guy right now. He is the starting point guard. He has the ball all the time. He's the one that runs stuff, right? Whoever calls the play, if it's a head coach, if it's Haliburton, they make it happen. They start the set. They initiate. They manipulate the defense. He runs the pick and rolls, right? He is the guy doing all that stuff. They have other guys who should do it every so often. We'll talk about Malcolm Brogdon later. If he's on the team next year, he should also be running this stuff on occasion, especially with Haliburton not in the game. He should, but not as much as Tyrese. That was a problem I think the Pacers had last year. I think it was good to experiment with other guards who needed the ball with him. Like he played with De'Aaron Fox in Sacramento. It was fine. But I think it was also pretty clear that he was better than them with the ball, and he should have it more often. If that means staggering minutes, if that means changing guys' roles, that would have to happen because I think Tyrese Haliburton He needs to have the ball more often. I think he needs to be the initiator as much as possible that isn't harmful. As long as it can be a positive and he doesn't just get overloaded or overwhelmed or can't give enough effort in other areas. I think he should have the ball as often as possible. I think he should be the Pacers starting point guard for a very long time. They have at least 2 more years of his current deal, plus then negotiating a restricted free agency. They can do a lot. He seems very invested in the community based on how he's been, in Indy these last couple of years. He could be a Pacer for, if restricted free agency goes perfectly for the Pacers, the next 7 seasons. You've got to start that guy's growth as soon as possible. And I think having him be the guy with the ball all the time is imperative for the Pacers this next season. And I think that they're going to recognize that and up his usage from what it was. Not that his usage was low necessarily, but 20.3% with the Pacers this past season. That's fine. But let me just give you an example. Caris LeVert, who they traded away, his usage with the Pacers this season was 26.8%. Much higher. And usage does track shooting stats in there. And Haliburton needs to be more aggressive, but his usage definitely needs to go up. He needs to have the ball more going forward. And I think the Pacers will make that something they focus on going forward. Speaking of Caris LeVert, let's just pivot right to him. A guy who had a very strange season for the Pacers. Was their only scorer at times, and yet took some steps back in some key areas, and ended up being the first guy they traded to jumpstart their rebuild. Before we talk about Caris LeVert's season, let's talk about PrizePicks. Are you looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA? Then you need to try the award-winning PrizePicks app. It's daily fantasy made easy. I love it, and I know you will too. What is PrizePicks? It's easy to use. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. It's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's super easy. PrizePicks is safe and offer fast withdrawals, and you can use the award-winning app on the App Store or Google Play. They offer any prop you can think of. Points, rebounds, steals, blocks, you name it, they got it. You can do mixed sport entries, so NBA plus whatever else is going on, MLB right now, NFL starting in whenever it starts, August, September, something like that. And they don't just have those sports. They've also got, like I said, NFL, MLB, soccer, college sports, MMA. You got to try it for a limited time. PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. You can get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point, but you must use the code NBA when you sign up. That's right, exclusive offer for Locked On fans. Sign up today. Use the code NBA for a $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On NBA Big Board is the way to go. Hear more about the draft from our Locked On draft experts. They know this stuff better than anyone. They've been tracking these guys for years. They've been going to workouts. They know their stuff, and you can learn from them as the Pacers have a very crucial draft coming up. Speaking of, Jaden Ivey prospect breakdown coming later this week. You won't want to miss that one, and I'm quite high on Jaden Ivey. Let's talk about Caris LeVert and his 2021-22 season with the Indiana Pacers. And I would like to talk about myself for a second, if you don't mind. I wrote before the season about Caris LeVert, and specifically about his fit with Domantas Sabonis, because that duo, if you'll recall at the end of the Nate Bjorkgren season, was carrying the Pacers quite often, right? They were the only healthy guys. Brogdon was hurt. Turner was hurt. Warren didn't play the whole season. Those were the creators. Those were the initiators of the offense. And that fit looked pretty good. They had really nice numbers with those two on the floor. They figured out how to play around them, how to insert other pieces around them. So I was pretty high on what that duo could mean for the Pacers this season. So I wrote the exact headline of, the Indiana Pacers can go as far as the Domantas Sabonis and Caris LeVert duo takes them. And Sabonis got traded and LeVert got traded. So wouldn't you know, they didn't go very far because that duo did not take them very far. And I think that's a very fitting way to dive into LeVert's season, because I thought after last season, LeVert could be more than he was for the Pacers this year. Not that he was bad, I just thought he could be more. And when we talk about some of the negatives of his season, I'll talk about why I think that was the case. When I talk about the good first, as I do with every player, and with LeVert, the obvious. Dude's the dynamic scorer. There's not an area on the court where Caris LeVert cannot get his shot off, and it's at least somewhat threatening, right? He's not like a great three-point shooter, but it's good enough that they have to guard it. He's an excellent mid-range guy. His handle's really tight. He's a good ISO player. It's very hard to find a spot on the floor where Caris LeVert can be totally ignored with the ball in his hands. That's a very valuable skill to have. It's tougher when you can't be a point guard and have the ball all the time because he's not the best passer. But he can finish from basically anywhere, right? I think one of the big things about his season, and something he improved on from his first stint with the Pacers, or his first season with the Pacers, the second, his rim finishing, 66% at the rim. He worked with coaches all the time after practice, from what we could see, on getting all the way to the basket. right? Not pulling up as much in that mid-range, but instead getting all the way to the basket. For example, first season with the Pacers, that was a problem, actually. His rates went up from 3 to 10 feet and the percentage of shots he was taking. And from 10 to 16 feet, his rates went down from 0 to 3 feet. I know the Pacers were working on that because he's such a good finisher. 66% is really good for a guard. He is a talented scorer. He can get to the rim. That is always valuable. A player who can drive all the way to the basket and break down a defense, even if they aren't necessarily the best passer, always a valuable player. And Caris LeVert showed that. That said, what made his season tough and why me thinking that him and Sabonis were so valuable, and Sabonis had a good year. He's not really the reason my prediction of those two being able to potentially carry the Pacers to where they want to be fell short, is that LeVert, and some of this was that his role changed, but he kind of fell off or fell back a little bit in a lot of other key areas, right? Assists per game. First stint with the Pacers, 4.9. That dropped under Carlisle to 4.4. It's not a big drop, but clearly a drop of some kind. And with the Nets, it was over 6, right? He was at 4.4 with the Nets playing alongside another point guard under 30 minutes per game. His passing stats with the Pacers dropped off from where they were in prior stints per 36 minutes. His final full season with the Nets, 2020-21, 5.9 per 36. 7.8 in the first half of the season, or I guess it was not half. But then he gets traded to the Pacers, drops to 5.4, then 5.1 with the Pacers in the 39 games he played this season. He got away from the passing a little bit. Some of that was role. They weren't asking him to pass as much. Some of that was he just wasn't as good of a passer this season. He was not as good at looking for those point guardy opportunities. And so that is somewhere where I think that he kind of fell off an impact in a way that was kind of painful for the Pacers. He needed to be a guy who could pass a little more. That would make defenses guard him a little differently. That would make them hesitate more to just send bodies to LeVert, and they were unable to do that. I think his defense definitely got worse. His defense this season was really rough sometimes. Going back to that defensive box plus minus stat that we talked about for Tyrese Haliburton, minus 0.5 for LeVert, his first season with the Pacers. That's not good, but it's close to average. This season, minus 1.3. That's bad. That is quite bad. I think that's very reflective of the player he was on that end of the floor. Got beat off the dribble often, was lost in the schemes, has the Jeremy Lamb reach-in syndrome all the time, and he doesn't have a high enough steal percentage to be that kind of guy. So he fell off a little bit in that area. He didn't turn it over as much, but a lot of key stats where you'd expect Caris LeVert to be at least a little more valuable, he got a little worse. His defensive rebound rate went down. His rebound rate in general went down, right? These are areas where Caris LeVert needed to be more for the Pacers than he was his first season if he was going to be a guy who, with Sabonis, helped carry them back to where they wanted to be in the playoffs. And he was not that. He was not what they needed him to be, even when he was the backup point guard or when Brogdon was out and he was the starting point guard. So I do think he had a good season. His scoring was effective. They needed him to be that guy quite often, and he was. He got better throughout the season, especially at getting to the rim. But the areas he fell short in were the ones that the Pacers needed him the most. They did not have enough playmaking this year. He's not quite a dominant enough shooter to take the threes he does. And so they traded him. And I think that was the right choice in their situation. But I think that him, not being as good as he was in his first year with the Pacers and not quite fitting with the whole core the way that the Pacers thought. He barely played with Turner his first year with the Pacers, for example. After coming back from his cancer diagnosis, Turner got hurt not long after that, right? He barely played with Brogdon his first season with the Pacers. The fit was thought to be better, and it just wasn't quite there. One stat that tells it all. There's quite a few for Caris, and I kind of just ran through them all, right? The assist numbers, they dropped. The threes, same deal. He took less threes per game. That got worse. And that needs to be something he gets a little better at if he's going to be an off-ball guard, because no way for the Pacers, he didn't have the ball as a point guard all the time. With the Cavs, he's definitely going to be more off-ball than he was even with the Pacers. They have an all-star point guard now in Darius Garland, right? He's got to get better at the three, even if he's not with the Pacers. And the other thing that I thought was a stat that kind of said a lot about LeVert's season is something I said earlier, but kind of just in passing, was the rim attempts, right? He is a really good finisher. He should shoot way more at the rim. With the Pacers this season, 19.5% of his shots came from 0 to 3 feet. For his whole career, it's 25.6%. That's a big difference. 5% of his shots at the rim, when you finish as well as he does, it's like a shot per game, basically. Like that, not quite. But it's close. I mean, he took 16 shots per game with the Pacers here. That's basically one shot per game if you can get all the way to the rim and get it closer to your season average. That is a big deal. And I think the Pacers should have been pushing for that. Because a 53% true shooting percentage, for a volume score is not good. It's not bad, but it's not good either. It has to be better. It was over that with his first stint with the Pacers. He's never been an efficient player, but it's got to be more efficient if he's going to play the way he does, because he's not a big foul drawer either. So that's why his finishing makes it great that he can get all the way to the rim. but he didn't do it as much for the Pacers this year. I feel like I'm being really picky about LeVert's season because being a high volume scorer who can score in the mid range does open up a lot for your team. And I think Caris LeVert was good for the Pacers this year in several ways, mainly as a scorer. But again, improved as the season went on. But there were just a lot of the holes in his game were really crippling to the players around him. So an area of growth for LeVert, even though he's not with the Pacers anymore, he's now with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Defense is a huge one. He did take a step back on that end of the floor. Even with the Cavs, his defensive impact remained about what it was with the Pacers in the first half of the season. If he could be even close to a neutral defender like he was his first year with the Pacers, that'd be huge. He was much better that first season with the Pacers. That's what led me to write that article in the first place. And then shot selection, right? He's not going to ever be a rims and threes only guy. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation for his skill set. In fact, I think that's a bad use of Caris LeVert and what he can be. But I think if he gets a little closer to being a rims and threes guy, like if he could be that 25% of his shots are from 0 to 3 feet guy, even if the rest of his shot profile mostly stays the same, like it's an even distribution of shifting from shots from, let's say, mid-range to the rim and long twos to the rim and threes to the rim, I think he'd be a much better player just by default. But also upping the three-point attempt rate could be a little helpful. It's 33% for his career. It was 30% with the Pacers this year. That's close to, again, that's like half a shot per game. Getting closer to being a Morey ball guy, even if it's not all the way, would help him quite a bit, especially as a guy with that 53% true shooting. So I obviously can't talk about what his future holds with the Pacers because Caris LeVert plays for the Cavaliers, division rival now, no longer with the Pacers. Good trade by the Pacers, even though that Cavs pick did not convey. That said, I do always fill in, instead of saying what the guy's future of the team is, I replace it with what can the Pacers learn from that player? What did I learn from that player? And for Caris LeVert, I think this one's really fascinating because I, as a person who watches a lot of basketball, breaks down basketball, tries to understand what makes winning teams go, and there's a lot of different reasons that teams are good and bad. Shot creation is one of, to me, the most valuable skills in the NBA. If you can create it for others, great. If you can create it for yourself, great. If you can do both, you're awesome. And for a little bit, it looked like LeVert could do both. But then it turned out he was mostly just a for himself kind of guy. And so the ceiling of a guy who is not 3-and-D is a commonly thrown out term in the NBA. The ceiling of a guy who's no 3 and no D, which LeVert is limited at both. He's not no either. But the ceiling of a guy who's not a 3 guy or a D guy, but is a creator, is not that high, right? You kind of just become a solid starter at best. So I was really high on LeVert after the trade, but when you think about that archetype of player, a really good creator with no 3 or no D, there is really a limit to what they can be, since they're likely going to be, slightly below average efficiency guy who isn't a great defender. They've got to be at their best creation-wise to be an awesome player. Remember when Caris, his first game with the Cavs, when they played in Indy, how locked in he was on defense and how he was creating at the end of that game? Not necessarily a revenge game, but certainly some motivation there. You remember how he defended Bradley Beal when it was a matchup that he really wanted to get up for? If he's that guy all the time, he'd be awesome. But he's not that guy all the time. And so there is quite a ceiling of a non-3, non-D creator, even if that is still a valuable skill to have. And to cap off that point, let's look at a different pacer. TJ Warren, right? TJ Warren with Phoenix was a no 3, no D guy for his first couple seasons. And that's why at first I thought when they paid him whatever, I forget what it was, 4 for 50 was his contract with Phoenix. I thought that was kind of an overpay. Turns out that was an underpay, but he got the 3 in his last season with Phoenix. And even then he was still traded with a second rounder for the Suns to get off of his contract, right? And then he got the D part in Indiana and became awesome and a super valuable player on the wing for them. You got to have one at least or both to be really valuable. And TJ Warren figured him out and became really valuable. And LeVert has not quite done that yet. And if he can take that path that Warren did, which is possible, although he's 27 now, that would really help his career going forward. One more guy to do player season reviews for today, and it's Malcolm Brogdon, perhaps the most polarizing player amongst Pacers fans these days in terms of what he is, what he can be, and what his future should be with the franchise. And I have my own thoughts, just like everyone else. So let's talk about Malcolm Brogdon's season with the Indiana Pacers, or at least the portion that he was able to play. Before we do that, I got to talk to you guys about Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models of vehicles, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that you need. You got to endure the pointless questioning from the guy behind the counter about the specs of your vehicle that you never know. Then you wait while the guy behind the counter orders those parts that you need on their computer. They only order the brands their warehouse carries. You got to go back to the warehouse and get it, or back to the chain store and get it. That's a pain. Don't do all that. You have a computer with access to rockauto.com at home or right in your pocket on your phone where you can save time and money, right? They're a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 2 decades. Their prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you could need for your vehicle upgrade or fixes, brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, new carpet. I need to replace part of my mirror on my car. I'm totally going to use Rock Auto to do it. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. When you get there and you're checking out, right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. See all the parts they have for your car or truck. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On NBA is the way to go. The finals matchup is set. I'm sure they're going to be previewing that action very often this week, plus other news around the NBA. The Lakers have a coach. There's only one more team with an opening in Charlotte as of now. We'll see where this all ends up. There's a lot to break down always around the league, and Locked On NBA has got you covered every single day. On the Pacers front, last player season review to do. Malcolm Brogdon, polarizing player for a million reasons. At the top of the list is injury history. His 2021-22 season featured some injuries, only 1,200 minutes, the lowest of his career by quite a bit, 230 minutes less than his previous low, his sophomore season with Milwaukee, which is a shame because when he played, he was still very good. Good passer, 6 assists per game, 19 points per game, quality defender. Even when his shot was betraying him, he was good, and easily the Pacers' most clutch player over the last 2 seasons. Basically, since Vic has not been a part of this franchise, Malcolm Brogdon has been the clutch guy for the Pacers, and I think he's done quite a good job. And yet, a lot of warts in his game, a lot of warts in his health, and there's a reason that his future with the team, despite getting an extension less than a year ago, is still cloudy. So let's look back on his 2021-22. The good about Malcolm Brogdon's season: passing, shooting, defense, big skills, right? None of the passing and shooting is the level of Haliburton. In fact, he only shot 31% from three, which I think does a disservice to the three-point shooter he is. Even his time with the Pacers for 3 seasons, 35%. That's still a quality number for the difficulty of shots he takes. Takes a lot of pull-up threes. Has not been the catch and shoot guy that he was in Milwaukee, but he's a dangerous enough shooter and definitely a good finisher this season. That was a big point of improvement for Brogdon. I thought was really crucial. Right in the past, he was definitely and very often only able to get about a half step advantage on his defender, so he'd get blocked a lot at the rim, right? That was a big problem for him. This year, he got better at getting past his guy and finishing. So his first 2 seasons with the Pacers, from at the rim, 53.3% and 55.4%. This past season, 63.2%. He got better at using his body, manufacturing those angles, a little more speed, was a much better finisher. The passing, at the same, a pretty high level passer. Malcolm Brogdon was. His assist percentage went up from last year to this year. And in a hybrid guard role, that's hard to do. So impressive stuff for him as an offensive engine. I think he's an underrated point guard in the NBA ecosystem in general. I know that that's tough to say because he doesn't play all the time, but his stats are still really good. 6 assists per game doesn't sound like that much, but it is. Like, that is a pretty healthy number, even for a guy who, people think of pure point guard. I never really know what that means. But, Malcolm Brogdon's 5.9 assists per game would rank 15th almost 15th in the NBA. 17th is Marcus Smart at 5.9, right? 16th is 6.2. So he'd be 17th in the NBA in assists per game. That's good. There's not a lot of those high-level assist guys outside of superstars who have the ball all the time, and Brogdon is certainly not that. So I think he's a good passer. I think he mostly is a good shooter, although a little inconsistent there. And his defense is very solid, especially on the ball. He's a good defender. Probably the Pacers' best on-ball defender for a lot of the season. And part of the reason their defense struggled so much is because he was out a lot of the time, right? When you're missing not your best, but one of your best point of attack guys, it's really hard to overcome. And I think that was something the Pacers dealt with often. Brogdon played less than half their games. That's a killer for them on the defensive end of the floor. Like, you just pull up the stats. Brogdon on the floor, Pacers defensive rating 113.5. Not great, but not bad. Brogdon off the floor, 118.1, right? That's a 5-point swing that he provides on the defensive end. Point of attack defense, turns out, is very valuable. Bad about Malcolm Brogdon's season. Hey, anyone heard of injuries? I know that this is not a state secret or anything, but Malcolm Brogdon is very injured all the time. Has only exceeded 70 games played in the season once. Has only exceeded 60 games played in the season twice, and neither of those seasons were with the Pacers. Now, is a little unfair because 2 of his 3 seasons with the Pacers were 72-game seasons, not 82-game seasons. So his percentage of games played was about the same as he averaged in Milwaukee his first 2 seasons. This past season, 36 games. The saying as it goes, as everybody knows, the best ability is availability, and Malcolm Brogdon does not have that, and he gets hurt with many, many things, and a lot of them are legitimate things, right? I know that that's hard to explain, but you can see them happen in game a lot. A lot of people were confused about Isaiah Jackson's injury. He got thrown a basketball at his face coming back from a concussion, like he was out with a headache, and everyone was very confused. Like you can see it happen. A lot of Brogdon's injuries you can see, but the reason that a lot of it is polarizing is there's a lot you can't see that make it a little harder for fans to kind of understand what he's going through and stuff like that, especially down the stretch of the season. Look, we all know why he was sitting out the last 10 games or whatever it was for the Pacers this year. But when he was healthy and TJ McConnell's coming back, it's a little harder to understand those kind of decisions. And I understand for a guy who doesn't play all the time, prioritizing his long-term health. But injuries have certainly held back Brogdon's total impact, not just with the Pacers, but his entire career. A lot of impact stats do a good job of explaining what your impact is when you're playing, but they don't do a good job of explaining your impact when you play less than half of the season. And that's where Brogdon has fallen short for the Pacers. His availability has not quite been there. And I think that, I don't know how players can work on that. They can, just because I'm not an athlete, I'm sure there are ways that they can, strengthen their muscles or strengthen their endurance in a way that makes their body more durable. I don't know how they work, but if Brogdon could somehow work on those things, because he talked about working on being healthier a few off seasons ago. I think it was his second off season with the Pacers. That would be awesome because that is what's absolutely killer for him. And the one stat that tells it all for him, going to keep going down the same path, 48.6. That is Malcolm Brogdon's games played this season. Wait, I'm getting a note from Locked On Pacers headquarters. Wait. That is his average games played per season since joining the Pacers, 48.6. Yikes. That is low. 36 was his actual games played with the Pacers this season. Shout out to Locked On Pacers headquarters, a fictional place that I just made up while talking, for shooting me that note for this joke. 36 games played. Yikes. That is bad. That has to be higher. And I get it. If it was a long injury that took him out for a long time or something like that, but it was just a bunch of little things over and over and over again. And that makes it so different. And I'm sure that number would have been higher if he didn't deal with the end of the season stuff where they were resting him down the stretch, right? That does change things. But Fox Sports, their website, is the best at kind of chronologically listing injuries for a player this season. So let's go through Malcolm Brogdon. October 19th, left AC joint. October 27th, hamstring injury. November 5th, illness. December 23rd, health and safety protocols. Okay, that's fine. And then the Achilles injury in January, again the Achilles in January, again the Achilles in January, and another Achilles in February, and then rest for the remainder of the season. Now, I am very pro resting a player with an Achilles injury. If you tear your Achilles, that is terrible. That is the worst thing that can happen to a player. The Pacers were very right to be cautious there. And if that was just a one-season thing where Brogdon was dealing with this Achilles thing, yes, okay, you would not. This discussion would be different. But it's every season. There's all these little things like what I talked about at the beginning of the season popping up that prevent him from having the full value that a team would want. So we'll see how that affects his future or anything like that. But injuries have certainly limited what he can be. So where can he grow? Because he's certainly good. Again, high-level skills on both ends of the floor. I have at times, and I still believe this, prior to the Haliburton trade, called Brogdon the Pacers' best player. I thought he was better than Sabonis at a lot of times. I very much value shot creation. Malcolm Brogdon can create his shot and create for others. Very good player. But where can he get better? One, health. Duh. I just beat it to death. I'm not going to go through it again. The second one to me is speed on defense. I think he's a very good team defender, one of the few guys who really shined in that area for the Pacers these last couple seasons. His angles are good. The way he stands kind of around passing lanes is good. Even though he doesn't have a good steal rate, he's good at recovering two guys, right? He doesn't jump in poor passing lane areas, right? That's what makes his defense pretty strong, is he's a good team defender and a decent, stocky on-ball guy, where he does fall a little short on defense, and I think this would help him a lot, especially playing point guard like he does now. He's not the best at guarding these speedy guards. If guys are quick with the ball, they can get by him pretty easily. And so for being a good point of attack defender, especially with guys who aren't as quick, that is one limitation he has. If he can get a little quicker at guarding those guys with the ball, and that's hard to do when I think he's 29. He'll be 29 to start next season. It's a little harder to gain speed at that age, but if he could, that would help him a lot on that end of the floor. So what's Malcolm Brogdon's future of the team? Very hotly contested question. I might do a podcast just on his future. He's one of the few guys that I think maybe merits a full show just on his future, even though he's not going to be a free agent this summer. The thing is, the Pacers went into this trade deadline, and it's pretty clear they were shopping a lot of their bets. Sabonis got traded, LeVert got traded, Justin Holiday, Jeremy Lamb. Turner might have if he didn't get injured. Who knows how much that impacted his value? But they couldn't trade him. And then there's Brogdon, who they legally could not trade because of the extension he signed the day before the season. I am curious how much that would have changed their deadline if they could have dealt it. They were moving other vets. They realized what their situation was. And so now I have the same wonder going into this summer when he is trade eligible again. Malcolm Brogdon's a good player. Malcolm Brogdon would help a lot of teams. A lot of teams. I think it's become clear what his best role is, and it's not the alpha that he was with the Pacers. It's more of second, third guy, on offense, and then, like one of the 3 or 4 best guys on a championship team, but not 1 or 2. And so I think that that's been realized by every NBA team. His value is really locked in. Everybody knows what his skills are. And so he's not, for the Pacers, that still is valuable. He fits well with Haliburton to me if he's willing to be a more off-ball role guy. He fits well with Carlisle's system. They were, again, before the COVID really turned their season in late December, they were close. They were like a 3 games under 500 team. That's not a good team, but much better than the perception of the Pacers is now. And that's when Brogdon was playing a lot more, right? And the fit with Haliburton, certainly if he moves to the off-ball role, he could have a role with the Pacers next year. He's a good player. He's one of their better defenders, right? There are reasons for the Pacers to bring him back, but the big one is he's 29. That's still sort of out of their core range. And who knows what his trade value will be if he ends up sustaining an injury, and especially with his injury history. This could be the time to do it. This could be now is the time to move on from Brogdon, recuperate some assets, and figure out how you want to build your team separately, because they couldn't deal him before, and now they're actually able to sniff around that market and see what they can get. So do I think they'll shop him? I don't know. I think they will listen to offers on Malcolm Brogdon. That's what I think. That's what makes the most sense. For a guy of his talent level who doesn't necessarily fit their timeline, even though he has a lot of years left under contract, and may overlap skill-wise with their future and their best player in Tyrese Haliburton, even though they can fit together if they both buy into a specific role, that has not happened yet. So I think it would be smart for the Pacers to listen to calls on Brogdon, and if they get an offer that makes sense, I think it does make sense to deal him. I think there are reasons to keep him too. I'm not suggesting one or the other, but I think it makes sense if the Pacers do decide to move on from him, maybe more so than any other player on the team, just given his skills. If Brogdon comes in mid-June and says, look, I like Indiana, and I know he does, and I'm willing to be way more off-ball next to Tyrese Haliburton, and I'll run the second unit as a point guard, then great. That is awesome. That would be the great role for him. That would help the Pacers be better next year. That would allow him to boost his value potentially if things still aren't working. But I don't necessarily know that that's going to be the case. And so whatever happens there, I think the Pacers they'll have all the available information to make the right decision. But I do think it'd be smart for the Pacers to listen to calls on Brogdon and determine his future from there. We've made it through the player season recaps, and we've made it through May. I hope everybody had a fun, longer weekend if they were able to have a third day off. And I hope everybody is excited, because June is when things get crazy for roster building. And I know I don't love fake trades or rumors or things like that, despite yesterday's show. But I will cover it all here on Locked On Pacers. So the rest of this week, TJ Warren free agency preview tomorrow, Jaden Ivey prospect preview, and then I'm talking with Matt George from Locked On Kings about a potential trade of the 6th and 4th picks, what that might actually look like. Matt George is awesome at what he does over at Locked On Kings. So that'll be fun, and that'll be a lot of what you can expect for the content this month. Huge draft for the Pacers coming up, big free agency period. We'll cover it all here on Locked On Pacers. So I hope everybody had a great month, great weekend, whatever. Thank you all for listening to this very long player season recap show. Hope you had a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.